Let's talk further about the Democratic Alliance's private members bill that it wants to bring before Parliament. Now bring in political analyst Sanusha Naidu, who's joining us this afternoon on SA Today. Sanusha, welcome back to SABC News. So one of the things the DA is proposing here is basically taking the powers to appoint members of the board of the Public Investment Corporation from the Deputy Minister and then giving it, it says, to an independent panel. Would that really cure the problems that the PIC has faced over successive years?
Good afternoon, Tembekile. Good afternoon to the viewers. I don't think so. I think it's a much deeper sore that has been festering for a long time regarding the way the PIC is governed. And if you go back to the Mbati Commission that was instituted, particularly after the challenges the PIC experienced with IO technologies. Remember that debacle years ago, I think it was around about 2017, where these issues of governance were really raised by the Commission and sought to talk about implementation of reforms. But there are two issues here. If you're going to depoliticize the appointment of the way in which the PIC is structured and the board, etc., then you also got to look at the way in which the PIC conducts its business, because it's now making investments, particularly with regard to the government employees pension fund, and they're investing in particular levels of investment which may not be beneficial to the growth of the pension fund. So I think there's two dimensions here that need to be offset with each other, because depoliticizing it may not deal with the bigger challenges of what was said in the insert by the spokesperson from COSATU around protecting the money and the growth of the money of pension funds by the PIC and how it conducts that to grow that money.
And given, Sanusha, that about 6 years ago now, 2020, there was those findings from the PIC Commission that looked into, again, what was a troubled period at the Public Investment Corporation. How much have the people in charge, including government, in fact, built on the findings and recommendations to build a better run and more resilient Public Investment Corporation?
I think the operative words there is resilient public investment corporation. From what I could gather, and it also is based on what reports have come out, we haven't really seen the level at which it needed to be a deep dive into the resilience of how it operates more efficiently, but also operates more effectively based on the governance kind of architecture that needed to be reformed. The fact of the matter is we're still having these kinds of challenges where the CEO has been suspended, the COO as well, in terms of what's going on. There's no clarity, there's no transparency, particularly investing the pension funds of civil servants, which is quite a big chunk of the PIC's over 3 trillion asset management fund. Then, of course, what you have is a bigger challenge. So I think the issue at hand is, I think depoliticizing it is one of the small steps towards how do you manage this fund. And it's the biggest fund in Africa, by the way. And there was talk years ago as well of how to tap into the pension funds to help invest part of South Africa's infrastructure investment and so forth. But then, of course, you started having these kinds of investments that were really quite troubling in the fact that they weren't creating a return of investment in growing the civil service pension fund, which is the GEPF. And the GEPF is a major fund, a major investor in the PIC. So I haven't seen that level of debate and that level of governance reform with regard to where you're investing in the market.
What ultimately then, at government level, should be the responsibility borne by the likes of the Deputy Minister for the multiple crises at the PIC?
Well, it's not just this deputy minister, I think. You've got to look at it over the years, as you rightly pointed out. It's been one of those very nagging and niggling issues that has just become much more deeper and manifesting at a much more granular level within the PIC. And I think the problem we have is we don't talk about the PIC in the same way we talk about how government tenders happen, or in the context of what we saw in the what we're seeing in the Madlanga Commission, but what we also saw with the Zondo Commission. And that is tapping into a fund in terms of creating the fiduciary responsibilities of accountability. Now, whether or not this, as was said, you let the SIU and the Hawks and, of course, even the Auditor General to do their work in order to try and find, where all of this rot is coming from. I think the challenge is also at what level is Treasury also willing to create that level of independence where it can actually carry out its financial services fiduciary level? Because remember, it is held accountable in that sense because of the way in which your financial standards are met. There are regulations, there are fiduciary responsibilities. But for government, I think it has to be one of those funds that also gets vetted and actually gets analyzed in terms of what's happening to the civil service pension fund.
Sanusha, I want to get your thoughts on this idea, the proposed apoliticization, depoliticization of the Public Investment Corporation. Is that something that can be achieved realistically, given the workings of an agency such as that, or corporation such as that, and our broader context around who is appointed under the current dispensation, or even what would be proposed in this DA bill?
Well, technically speaking, it's a private member's bill, so it has to go through the whole kind of processes in terms of when it comes to Parliament, how it gets sectioned and labeled as a bill, and of course, does it get the necessary ventilation and support? Given the fact that now you have in Parliament not necessarily the kind of traction you had previously under the previous administration of parliaments, but you now have this level of a GNU. Now, let's assume that it goes through all of that and it comes to that level of voting. We'll have to see how political parties respond to it as a private member's bill. But then, of course, theoretically, if it is to go through, the question for me is much more than whether you depoliticize it. I think the question is, how do you create market regulations around it? Because that then means, even if you depoliticize it, you create an independent panel, what are the investment decisions of an asset management? And that's key, because we've seen in the past the market can be very, very hostile, but you also can make mistakes in your investment. So the asset management issue is something that I think needs a further step. How this happens is in terms of whether or not you're going to see Parliament go that one step further and say, let's also look at how these investments are happening under the asset management kind of architecture.
Sanusha Naidu, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for making time to be with us on SABC News this afternoon.